In the quiet farming town of Cedar Hills, they were the couple people pointed to when they wanted to believe love could last. Claire Matthews, with her easy laugh and patient smile, taught second grade at the small elementary school on Maple Street. Her husband Ethan ran a modest construction business that kept roofs patched and barns standing. They posed together for holiday photos in front of their white farmhouse, waved to neighbors from the porch swing, and on Sunday mornings, you could always find them in the same pew at First Baptist. To anyone looking in, theirs was a simple, solid life. Two people who had found each other, built a home together, and never let go. Cedar Hills thrived on such examples. It was the kind of town where front doors stayed unlocked, where people knew the names of each other's, and the gossip, though constant, rarely carried malice. And if there was any talk about Claire and Ethan, it was the warm sort. "They're such a good match," the church ladies would say, or "You can tell they still love each other, even after 7 years." But Cedar Hills had its way of keeping secrets tucked beneath white fences and tidy lawns. People might nod and smile, but they were also watching. And sometimes a single careless word could shift the ground beneath you. It happened on one of those late summer Saturdays that linger warm in memory, when the air smells faintly of cut grass and barbecue smoke, and the sun hangs low and gold over the cornfields. Claire and Ethan had been invited to a backyard cookout hosted by the Petersons, an older couple who lived 2 houses over. Folding tables groaned under bowls of potato salad, grilled chicken, and cobblers that seemed to appear out of thin air. Kids darted between the legs of chatting adults, shrieking in bursts of laughter. Claire was standing near the drinks table, plastic cup in hand, when she heard her name. She turned to find Helen Bridges, a retired librarian with a knack for remembering every face she'd ever seen, squinting at Ethan from across the yard. Helen had that look, half smile, half puzzlement, as though she were fitting a piece into a mental puzzle. "You know," Helen said, leaning closer to Claire as if sharing a harmless secret, "your husband looks so much like my cousin Ronnie. Spitting image, I'd say. Haven't seen Ronnie since he ran off back in the 80s. But goodness, if I didn't know better." She trailed off, chuckling. "Isn't it funny how folks can have doubles?" Claire laughed politely, though her curiosity caught on that comment like a burr on fabric. Ethan, oblivious, was across the lawn talking with Mr. Peterson about shingles. Claire took a sip of her sweet tea, letting Helen's words settle in her mind. People saw resemblances all the time. Neighbors swore her student's new puppy looked like her. But there was something in Helen's tone, in the way she kept glancing at Ethan, that made the air feel heavier. The rest of the afternoon passed in its usual rhythm: good food, easy talk, the slow gathering of plates as dusk settled. But when they walked home under the orange-pink sky, Ethan's hand warm in hers, Claire found herself studying the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She had never thought to compare him to anyone from her family, or from someone else's. That night, after Ethan had drifted off, she sat at the edge of their bed and thought about Helen's cousin Ronnie. She tried to picture him, though she'd never seen a photo. Her mind reached back to her own childhood, raised by her mother, Margaret, in a small rental on the other side of the county. Her father had never been part of the picture. Margaret spoke of him rarely, always with a brisk, "It's better you don't know," as if the truth were a splinter too deep to dig out. Ethan's history wasn't much different. His mother, Janice, raised him alone in a town 2 hours away, telling him only that his father wasn't worth talking about. They had bonded over that absence when they first met, both claiming it made them stronger. But now, sitting in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Claire thought of the small coincidences she had brushed aside over the years. The odd familiarity in some of their old family photos, the shared aversion to sunflower seeds that once sent them both to urgent care after a wedding reception. It had been a joke at the time. "We must be long-lost cousins," Ethan had said, laughing as they shared the allergy forms. Back then, it was just a funny line. Now the words sat in her memory like a stone. She reached for the photo box on her nightstand, thumbing through dog-eared snapshots from her childhood. Near the bottom was a Polaroid of her mother holding a baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. The handwriting on the back read, "Spring 1988. Claire traced the faded ink. Ethan had been born in August 1987. It was nothing, she told herself. Coincidence. And yet, when she lay back down, the image of Helen's knowing smile lingered in her mind. It was the kind of comment that could be forgotten by morning, or could pull at a thread she might not be ready to unravel. Cedar Hills slept quietly outside, porch lights blinking off one by one. But inside the Matthews farmhouse, the first hairline crack in the perfect picture had formed, invisible to the eye but destined to spread. The next morning, Claire tried to shake it off. She made coffee, fed the cat, watered the geraniums on the porch, and told herself Helen's comment had been nothing more than idle chatter. Cedar Hills thrived on that sort of thing. How many times had she heard someone remark that the cashier at Miller's Market looked like their high school boyfriend? But the human mind has a way of worrying a thought like a loose tooth, and by mid-morning she was reaching for the photo box again. This time she spread its contents across the kitchen table. Birthdays with paper hats, summers at the lake, Christmas mornings in her mother's small living room. She kept circling back to that single Polaroid. Margaret, younger and softer looking, holding a baby. The date on the back still bothered her, 1988. That would have been the year after Ethan was born. When Ethan came in from the yard, brushing sawdust from his jeans, she slid the photos into a neat pile and pretended to be sorting them for a school project. He kissed her on the top of her head and went to wash up, humming some tune from the radio. She studied him as he moved through the kitchen, the slope of his shoulders, the shape of his hands. None of it had ever seemed out of place before. That afternoon, she drove to the county records office under the guise of renewing her teaching certification. While she was there, she filled out a request for a copy of her birth certificate, a document she hadn't seen in years. The clerk, a bored-looking woman in a floral blouse, took her information without comment. Back home, she searched for Ethan's birth certificate in the file cabinet where they kept insurance papers and tax returns. She told herself it was idle curiosity. She told herself couples didn't have secrets about things like this. In the middle drawer, under a folder marked Home Repairs, she found it, a slightly yellowed document, folded in thirds. Her eyes went first to the mother's name, Janice Marie Matthews. Father's name, blank. She stared at that empty space longer than she meant to, her mind filling it with the one name she'd never been allowed to write down, her own father's. She skimmed down to Janice's maiden name and felt her stomach tighten. She recognized it. Not from a neighbor, not from a colleague, but from a box of old letters in her mother's attic, signed with the same looping handwriting. It was enough to make her pulse quicken, but not enough to confirm anything. She needed more. That night over dinner, she brought it up as casually as she could. "You ever think about finding out who your dad was?" she asked, twirling pasta on her fork. Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes. But Mom always made it clear he didn't want to be found. Said he was trouble." "Why?" Just curious," she said, careful to keep her tone light. "I don't know who mine was either." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Guess that's one more thing we've got in common." Later, as he watched television, she sat beside him, pretending to follow the plot, but her mind kept drifting. She imagined their family trees as two bare branches, separate but bending toward each other in some unseen wind, roots tangling far below the soil. The next day at school, she lingered in the teacher's lounge after lunch, scrolling through her phone. An ad for an Ancestry DNA kit popped up. Half price. She clicked on it without thinking, read the description twice, then added 2 kits to her cart. She would make it a project, a fun way to learn more about their backgrounds. People did it all the time. That evening, she mentioned it to Ethan while they cleared the dinner table. "Wouldn't it be interesting to see where we're from? Like, I bet you've got some Irish or something in there." He hesitated, stacking plates. "I don't know. My mom would probably have a fit if she knew I was sending my DNA to strangers." Claire laughed. "It's not like they're gonna clone you. It's just for fun." He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, why not?" When the kits arrived 3 days later, she placed them on the counter with a couple of mugs of coffee. They swabbed their cheeks, sealed the samples, and dropped them in the mailbox together. Claire smiled as the envelopes disappeared into the slot, but her chest felt tight. That night, as they got ready for bed, Ethan mentioned offhandedly, "Talked to Mom today, told her about the test. She asked why we were doing it. Sounded I don't know. Nervous. Claire's heart skipped. Nervous? Yeah, said she hoped it wouldn't dig up anything better left buried. I laughed it off, but it was weird. She lay awake for hours replaying that sentence in her mind. Better left buried. What could Janice possibly mean? Outside, Cedar Hills slept under a quilt of cricket song and the faint hum of the grain silos. But inside Claire's head, something had begun to stir, an unease she couldn't name, a shadow stretching across the life she thought she knew. The days that followed seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if time itself sensed her anticipation. The tests were in some lab now, her and Ethan's genetic codes sitting side by side on a conveyor belt, waiting for machines to decode them. It should have been nothing. People did these ancestry kits for fun all the time. But Claire found herself avoiding eye contact with Ethan when the mail came, avoiding even casual conversations that might wander toward the subject. She told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. This was a mutual project, something they'd agreed to together. Still, she felt a tremor of guilt when she thought about what she might discover, as though simply looking for the truth was a kind of betrayal. On Friday, she met Rachel for coffee at the little cafe near the post office. Rachel had been her closest friend since college, the kind of friend who noticed when your voice wavered, even over a bad phone connection. You look like you haven't slept, Rachel said, stirring sugar into her latte. Claire smiled faintly. I've got a lot on my mind. Ethan? Claire hesitated, then leaned forward. Do you believe in coincidences? Like really strange ones? Rachel raised an eyebrow. You're going to have to be more specific. She told her about Helen's comment at the barbecue, about the Polaroid, about the empty space on Ethan's birth certificate. She left out the part about Janice's maiden name matching something from her mother's letters. She wasn't ready to share that yet. Rachel listened quietly, her face unreadable. When Claire was finished, she sat back in her chair. Okay, I'll say it. Be careful. Curiosity like this, it can blow your life up. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. Claire exhaled slowly. I just want to be sure, that's all. If it's nothing, then I can stop thinking about it. Rachel tapped her spoon against the mug. And if it's not nothing? Claire didn't answer. That evening, she came home to find Ethan in the garage, sanding the edge of a kitchen cabinet he was refinishing. The sound of the sander filled the air, a steady drone that made conversation impossible. She watched him for a moment, focused, patient, oblivious to the storm brewing in her head. When he noticed her, he shut off the sander and grinned. Hey, how was your day? Fine, she said, just thinking about the day test. He shrugged. We won't know anything for weeks. No point in worrying about it. But she was worried, not about the waiting, but about what the results might confirm. 2 weeks later, an email arrived from the testing company. Claire's hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't the results, just a notification that the samples had been processed and were in the analysis stage. Estimated completion, 7 to 10 days. 7 to 10 days. It might as well have been a year. That night, over dinner, she asked Ethan if he'd told anyone else about the test. Just Mom, he said. Why? Why? She seemed, what, surprised? Upset? He thought for a moment. Not upset, just tense, like she knew something and didn't want to talk about it. Claire's fork hovered above her plate. What do you think she meant by better left buried? He gave a short laugh. I don't know. She's always been dramatic. Probably some old family feud. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Janice's words had been meant as a warning. The next day, she found herself Googling Janice's maiden name, pairing it with words like family tree, genealogy, records. She found obituaries, birth announcements, and an old newspaper clipping from the late 80s about a man named Richard Klein who'd been involved in a trucking accident just outside of Cedar Hills. The name pulled at something in her memory, though she couldn't quite place it. She clicked through records until her eyes burned, piecing together fragments that didn't yet form a whole. That night, she lay beside Ethan, staring at the ceiling. 7 to 10 days. In that time, they would still cook dinner together, still watch the weather report, still smile at each other across the breakfast table. And every moment would carry the silent question, what if the person you've built your life with is not just your husband, but your blood. It was a question that, once asked, could never be unasked. And the answer, when it came, would change everything. The email came on a Wednesday morning, just after sunrise. Claire was at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling beside her when her phone vibrated. The subject line was simple. Your DNA results are ready. For a moment, she just stared at it, her thumb hovering above the screen. She could hear Ethan in the shower upstairs, the muted thud of water against tile, and she knew this was her moment. Quiet, private. She tapped the email, her pulse quickening. The page loaded slowly, as though the universe itself wanted to delay the truth a little longer. When the results appeared, her eyes went straight to the close family section. At the very top, highlighted in a pale yellow box, was a name she knew better than her own. Ethan Matthews, half-sibling. She blinked, convinced she was misreading it. The number beneath it was a percentage, 27.3% shared DNA. Not a cousin, not a distant relative, half of the same father or mother. The company's chart made it explicit, likely half-sibling. The air in the kitchen seemed to thin. She scrolled down, hoping for a loophole, a line of fine print that would let her dismiss it as an error. But the rest of the report only deepened her dread. They had several shared matches, second and third cousins, whose family trees linked to a man named Richard Klein. She felt her stomach clench. Richard Klein, the name from that old newspaper clipping, the man she'd seen mentioned in her mother's letters, the man neither she nor Ethan had ever met, but whose absence had shaped them both. Her mind refused to settle. She thought of every meal they'd shared, every kiss, every private moment, now overlaid with this new truth. The world she'd known for 7 years tilted, its edges fraying. The sound of the shower stopped. She closed the browser and set her phone face down, staring at the cooling coffee as if it might offer her some anchor. Upstairs, she heard Ethan moving around, humming to himself. When he came into the kitchen, hair damp and shirt untucked, she smiled because she didn't know what else to do. "Morning, I'm fine," he said, pouring himself a cup. "You okay? You look pale." "Didn't sleep well," she murmured. She wanted to ask him if he'd checked his results yet, but she couldn't bring herself to. Not yet. She needed to be sure before the ground gave way entirely. After he left for work, she reopened the results and read them again. She called the company's customer service line, her voice steady only because she forced it to be. A cheerful woman confirmed the obvious. The results were accurate, the margin of error microscopic. "I just didn't expect this," Claire said, pressing her palm to her forehead. "It can be surprising," the woman replied gently. "Sometimes families have secrets." Secrets. The word echoed in her chest. That evening, Ethan seemed distracted, as if something was gnawing at him too. Over dinner, she asked casually, "Did you get your DNA results yet?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, this morning." "And?" "They said you're my half-sister." He tried to laugh, but it was a thin, brittle sound. "Must be some kind of mistake." "It's not," she said. His eyes flickered up to hers, and for the first time, she saw something like fear there. "I called my mom," he said. "She hung up on me." Claire's chest tightened. "I think we have the same father," she said quietly. "Richard Klein." Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw. Mom mentioned that name once. Said he was trouble. I guess she wasn't lying. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind rattled the kitchen window. "What do we do now?" he asked finally. Claire didn't have an answer. All she knew was that the life they had built, the marriage she thought was unshakable, had been cracked down the middle. And no matter how careful they were, no matter how much they tried to ignore it, that crack would only widen. Claire waited 2 days before bringing it up again. 2 days of moving through the house like an actor hitting her marks, making coffee, folding laundry, asking about Ethan's day, while the truth sat between them like a loaded weapon neither wanted to touch. At night, they lay on opposite sides of the bed, both pretending to sleep. She could hear the change in his breathing when he was awake, could feel the tension in his muscles even when he didn't move. On the third evening, after the dinner plates had been rinsed and stacked to dry, Claire set her phone on the table and slid a printed sheet across to him. The DNA report. Ethan stared at it for a moment before pulling it closer, scanning the highlighted sections. His jaw tightened. I already told you, he said, his voice low. I saw the same thing on my results. I know, but seeing it in black and white, there's no denying it. Ethan pushed the paper away, rubbing the back of his neck. So what? What do you want me to say? I want you to admit what this means, she said, her own voice trembling now. We're not just husband and wife. We're... She stopped, the word catching in her throat. Half siblings, he finished for her. He didn't flinch when he said it, but his eyes darted away. Claire felt a rush of nausea. We can't stay married. We can't pretend this is normal. He looked back at her then, and there was something defiant in his expression. Why not? We didn't know. It's not like we grew up together. We love each other, Claire. That hasn't changed. It changes everything, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Ethan leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. Look me in the eye and tell me you stopped loving me the second you found out. She couldn't answer. Love wasn't a switch you could flip off, but the thing they had built was poisoned now, every memory shadowed by this new truth. I'm filing for an annulment, she said finally, and I'm telling people the truth. Something dark flickered across his face. No, you're not. Her pulse jumped. What do you mean, no? We keep this between us. You walk away quietly if you have to, but you don't drag my name and my business through the mud. You think people here will understand? They'll turn us into a freak show. It's already a freak show, Ethan, she said, her voice cracking, and you're asking me to keep living in it. He stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. You think you're the only one humiliated? You think I wanted this? I didn't ask for any of it, but I'm not going to throw my life away because some man 30 years ago couldn't keep it in his pants. Claire pushed back her chair and stood too, feeling the heat rise in her chest. This isn't about him anymore. It's about us. And I can't... Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping. We can still have what we had if you just stop obsessing over labels. She stared at him, unable to decide if he was delusional or desperate. You're my brother, she whispered. Half-brother, he said, almost pleading now. The sound of it made her skin crawl. She brushed past him, heading for the stairs, her legs trembling. I'm sleeping in the guest room, she said over her shoulder. He didn't follow her. Upstairs, she closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the muffled sounds of him moving around the kitchen, the clink of glass, the low rumble of his voice as he made a call she couldn't quite hear. Her mind replayed the conversation in fragments, his refusal to let go, his insistence they could still be them. It was a logic that made no sense, and yet she saw the danger in it. The more he believed it, the harder it would be to get away. She crossed to the window and looked down at the darkened street. Cedar Hills was quiet, the kind of quiet that masked everything simmering beneath the surface. Somewhere out there, she thought, someone knew more about Richard Klein than either she or Ethan did. Somewhere the rest of the truth was waiting, and when it came, there'd be no way to contain it. The first whisper reached her at the grocery store. Claire was halfway down the cereal aisle when she noticed two women by the produce section glance in her direction, lean close to each other, and laugh in that sharp, knowing way. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining it, but then one of them, a woman she recognized from church, quickly looked away when their eyes met. By the following week, it was everywhere, not shouted, not posted online, but carried in the lowered voices of neighbors who used to wave as she passed. Rachel swore she hadn't told a soul, but guilt trembled in her voice when she said it. Claire didn't need a confession. She knew how this town worked. All it took was one loose remark at the wrong kitchen table, and the story grew legs. She started leaving the house less. At school, she kept her head down, breezing past the other teachers' conversations. Parents who once chatted in the pickup line now avoided eye contact. The kids didn't know exactly what was going on, but they could sense something. They were quieter around her, hesitant. Ethan seemed immune to the shift. If it bothered him, he didn't show it. In fact, he began acting almost defiantly normal, fixing things around the house, bringing home takeout, making small talk as if nothing had changed. But there was an edge to it, a stubbornness that felt less like comfort and more like denial. At night, the silence between them stretched longer. Claire lay awake, listening to the faint sound of him drinking in the living room. Bottles began to gather in the recycling bin, whiskey, beer, whatever dulled the edges for him. One evening, after a particularly strained dinner, she drove to her mother's house. Margaret lived in a narrow bungalow at the far end of town, the kind of place where the curtains were always drawn and the air smelled faintly of cedar. When Claire told her what the DNA test had revealed, Margaret sat very still, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I knew Richard had another child," she said finally, "but I never thought—" She trailed off, her voice thinning. "You knew?" Claire's voice rose before she could stop it. "You knew and you never told me?" Margaret's eyes were wet, but her tone was defensive. "I thought it was a boy from another town. I didn't know it was Ethan. I didn't even know his last name." "That doesn't make it better," Claire said, standing. "You could have stopped this before it started." Her mother's mouth trembled. "I didn't want to ruin your happiness." The words hit Claire like a slap. Happiness, as if ignorance had been a gift. She left without saying goodbye. When she returned home, Ethan was in the kitchen, a half-empty glass in front of him. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "At my mother's," she said, brushing past him. "Talking about me, I'm sure." She didn't answer. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. She could feel the house pressing in on her, walls steeped in a history she didn't want to carry. Later that night, he came up and leaned against the doorway. "We could just go, leave Cedar Hills, start over somewhere nobody knows us." She looked at him. "And pretend this never happened?" "Yes," he said simply. She almost laughed. "It happened, Ethan. It'll follow us no matter where we go." He stepped into the room, his voice softening. "I can't lose you." Claire turned away, but the weight of his words lingered. There was something dangerous in them. Not just love, but ownership. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't sure which was stronger. The first snow of the season came early that year, frosting the roofs of Cedar Hills and muting the streets in a soft, deceptive calm. Claire stood at the kitchen window that Saturday morning, watching flakes swirl past the glass, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. Ethan was in the living room, the TV droning some muted sports channel, his body sunk into the couch as though gravity had claimed him entirely. They hadn't touched in weeks. Conversations had become brief exchanges of necessity about groceries, bills, the cat's vet appointment, each word a stone passed hand to hand, heavy and deliberate. She'd thought about leaving outright, taking a bag and driving until the town was a speck in the rearview mirror. But the thought of what he might do if she disappeared without warning knotted her stomach. That afternoon, Rachel called. Her voice was tight, urgent. "Claire, I need to tell you something. I was at Murphy's last night. Ethan was there. He was drunk, talking to a couple of guys from the hardware store. He told them you were overreacting and that you'd come around once you stopped listening to gossip. He said you were still his wife, like it didn't matter what anyone else thought." Claire gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Did he say anything else?" Rachel hesitated. "Just that he'd never let you walk away. I don't think he meant it as a threat, but—" "He meant it," Claire said, her voice flat. When she hung up, she found him in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge. "You were at Murphy's last night?" she asked. "Yeah," he said without looking at her. "So? So you were talking about me." He turned, closing the fridge door with a lazy push. "People are already talking, Claire. Might as well give them my side." "Your side?" "That you're still my wife. That we didn't do anything wrong." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "We are half-siblings, Ethan. That's not nothing." His expression hardened. "We didn't choose it. We found each other. We fell in love. End of story. I'm not letting a stupid piece of paper or some stranger's idea of morality decide my life." She stepped back, the edge of the counter pressing into her spine. "This isn't about morality. It's about reality. And I can't live like this." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "You can't or you won't." "I won't," she said, forcing her voice to steady. They stared at each other for a long moment, the space between them thick with everything unspoken. Then he turned away, grabbing his coat. "You'll change your mind," he said as he walked out. The door slammed behind him and the sound reverberated through the house long after his truck pulled away. That night, she packed a bag, just the essentials, clothes, toiletries, the photo of her as a child with her mother that she'd kept on her nightstand. She tucked the bag into the back of the closet, hidden behind winter coats, ready for the moment she decided to go. But she didn't leave. Not yet. Some part of her was waiting for a catalyst, a final fracture that would make staying impossible. It came 3 nights later. She woke to the sound of the front door unlocking, slow, deliberate. Ethan had been out again, drinking. She lay still, her heart thudding, as he came up the stairs. He paused in the hallway, then opened the guest room door. In the dim light, she saw him leaning in the doorway, watching her. His voice was soft, almost tender. "You're still mine, Claire." She didn't answer. She couldn't. He stood there for what felt like forever before finally turning away. She listened to his footsteps retreat, each one a reminder that the man she'd once loved without question was now a stranger, one who knew too much about her, one she could no longer trust. By morning, she knew the bag in the closet wouldn't be enough. She needed a plan, and this time she wouldn't give him the chance to stop her. The next week, Claire moved like a ghost through her own life. Every step, every word was calculated, her true thoughts hidden beneath a practiced mask of normalcy. She knew Ethan was watching her, sometimes subtly, sometimes with the unblinking weight of suspicion, so she gave him nothing to react to. She made breakfast, asked about his day, even sat with him through the muted comfort of evening television. But inside, she was measuring distances, from the back door to her car, from her car to the highway, from Cedar Hills to anywhere else. The bag in the closet grew heavier by the day, its weight a silent promise. She began tucking away cash from grocery runs, folding the bills into a worn envelope hidden inside a cookbook Ethan never opened. She cleared the history on her phone after every online search, shelters, rental listings, bus schedules, leaving behind only the innocuous traces of weather reports and recipes. Rachel became her quiet ally. They met twice, each time in the noisy safety of the cafe where the hiss of the espresso machine swallowed their words. Rachel's eyes darted to the door every few minutes, as if half expecting Ethan to walk in. "When you go," she whispered during their second meeting, "you can stay with me for a bit. Just don't tell me when until it's already done." That night, Claire lay awake in the guest room, tracing the faint lines of moonlight across the ceiling. The plan was simple. Wait until Ethan left for a job in the next county, a day he'd be gone from dawn until dusk. She'd load her car, drive to Rachel's, and from there, figure out the rest. No goodbye, no confrontation, just absence. But the simplicity was fragile. She knew one wrong move, one misplaced word, could tip Ethan off. And lately his behavior had shifted again. He was quieter, more watchful, his casual conversations punctuated with questions that felt too pointed. One evening, as she was chopping vegetables for dinner, he leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on her hands. "You've been calmer lately," he said. She forced a small smile. "Trying to be. I don't like fighting." He nodded slowly as if weighing the truth of her words. "Good. I don't either." The next morning, he mentioned a roofing job 2 towns over. "Might take the whole day," he said over coffee. Claire's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice even. "Sounds busy." She marked the date in her head. 3 days. That was the window. In those 3 days, she prepared with quiet precision. She refilled the gas tank, checked the tire pressure, made sure her phone charger was in the car. She packed the bag with more clothes, her teaching certificates, the spare house key she planned to leave behind. But the night before she was set to leave, Ethan surprised her. He came home early, the smell of rain clinging to his coat, and sat across from her at the table without touching his dinner. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "we should take a trip, just the two of us. Get away from here, somewhere no one knows us." Her throat tightened. "When?" "Soon. I'll handle everything." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You and me against the world, right?" She nodded because it was the only safe answer. But inside, the alarm bells were deafening. Whatever trip he had in mind, it wouldn't be an escape for her. It would be a way to keep her close, to control the narrative, to make sure she never slipped out of his reach. That night, she moved the bag from the closet to the trunk of her car while he slept. The envelope of cash went into her purse. 3 days had turned into one, and when morning came, she would be gone before he even knew the day had started. The morning came wrapped in a pale, icy fog that clung to the streets and muted the sound of her footsteps. Claire woke before the alarm, lying still in the guest room for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. No creak of floorboards, no clink of mugs from the kitchen. Ethan was still asleep. She slipped from bed, heart already thudding. Every movement was deliberate. Jeans pulled on without the light, sweater over her head, socks muffling her steps. In the bathroom, she brushed her teeth without turning on the fan, spitting quietly into the sink. The routine felt both surreal and razor-sharp, like she was stepping through a dream she'd been rehearsing for weeks. Downstairs, she moved quickly, purse over her shoulder, the envelope of cash inside. She checked the front door, locked from the inside, then padded to the garage. The key in her pocket felt like a talisman, a last fragile link to control. Her car sat in the half-dark, faintly silver under the garage light she dared not turn on. She opened the trunk and adjusted the bag she'd stashed days before, making sure it was wedged tight. Every sound seemed magnified, the click of the trunk latch, the soft groan of the garage door rising. She was halfway into the driver's seat when a voice cut through the fog. "Going somewhere?" Ethan stood in the doorway to the kitchen, barefoot, his hair mussed from sleep. His tone wasn't raised, but it carried something heavier, curiosity sharpened into suspicion. Claire froze, one hand on the steering wheel. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get an early start on errands. At 6 a.m., he stepped forward, bare feet slapping softly against the concrete. "With all your things?" The air between them seemed to contract. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I needed some space." "Space," he repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign. "Space from your husband or from your brother?" The word landed like a slap, raw and deliberate. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I can't stay here, Ethan." His mouth curved, not a smile, but something that mimicked one. "And where would you go? Rachel's? You think I don't know she's been helping you?" Her pulse roared in her ears. "Move, Ethan." He didn't. "You walk out that door, Claire, you'll regret it." Something in his voice, the cold certainty, ignited a spark she hadn't felt in weeks. Fear, yes, but also defiance. She started the engine, the sound loud in the enclosed space. "Move," she said again, louder this time. For a moment, she thought he might lunge, drag her from the car, but then he stepped back, hands raised slightly, eyes locked on hers. "Go then, but don't think you are rid of me." She reversed out of the driveway, the fog swallowing the house as she turned the corner. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her hands rigid on the wheel. Every stop sign felt like a trap, every passing car a shadow of him in pursuit. At Rachel's, she parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest, pulling her coat tight around her. Rachel opened the door in a rush, ushering her inside without a word. They sat at the kitchen table, steam curling from untouched mugs of coffee. Claire's hands shook as she recounted the confrontation, the way his eyes had followed her even as she drove away. "You can't go back," Rachel said, her voice low but firm. "I won't," Claire answered. But in her chest, doubt pressed like a stone. She'd escaped the house, yes, but Ethan's words clung to her, heavy and unshakable. "Don't think you're rid of me." And she knew he meant them. The first 2 nights at Rachel's passed in a strange half-silence, as if speaking too loudly might draw Ethan to the door. Claire kept her phone on silent, but the missed calls stacked up, his name appearing over and over until it had blurred into something almost mechanical. She didn't answer. She didn't delete them either. Part of her wanted the record, proof that he was reaching for her, circling. On the third morning, she woke to find a note slipped under Rachel's front door. No envelope, just a sheet of lined paper in his cramped handwriting. "You think you can hide from me? You can't. We are bound, Claire. You'll see." Her stomach turned cold. She didn't tell Rachel. Her friend had already risked enough by giving her shelter. But she folded the note and slid it into her purse. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise, and that day she made her decision. Hiding wasn't enough. Running wasn't enough. This had to end. She started by calling her mother. Margaret's voice was wary when she answered, but when Claire explained briefly that Ethan wouldn't let her go, something in her tone hardened. "You know where the key is," her mother said. "Use it. Take what you need." The next step was more dangerous. She went back to the house, not in daylight, but just after dusk, when the streets were soft with shadow and most of the neighborhood was indoors. She parked around the corner, walked quickly to the side gate, and slipped inside. The house was dark. Either he wasn't home, or he was waiting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of whiskey and dust. She moved through the rooms quickly, pulling open drawers, gathering what she'd come for: family documents, her grandmother's jewelry, the small lockbox that held both their birth certificates. She took the one that was hers and the one that was his. In the living room, she paused. On the coffee table sat the Natest printout, the yellow highlighted line still visible under the lamplight. It was weighted down by a small object, the Polaroid from the barbecue, the one that had started it all. Her hand hovered over it, and then she took it too. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was the first step toward it, and for now, that was enough.